Tell me what happened to your home in the Palisades fire and tell us a little bit about that journey.
Our house burned down in that fire in January 2025. It also led to me getting diagnosed with a rare cancer.
Steve, did all of this come together for you and say, now I'm going to build something for the patient?
For me, that was the first clue that there's a lot of medical knowledge in the training set for AI. This could be very helpful in educating me about, my specific situation.
This experience really moved you, right?
I was doing multiple agents, using multiple models, and having the agents debate each other from different points of view about things.
So Steve, what does success look like for CureWise a couple years down the road?
And part of it is help you, with your disease, get, understand what's going on and get the best care possible. The other part of it is all of us together, let's help accelerate the science.
Well, Steve, welcome to the show. How are you today? You're calling in from beautiful Southern California?
Yes, I'm actually in Santa Monica in a hotel, and out my window I can see where we used to live in Malibu Palisades area.
Well, yeah, I couldn't believe it as I was doing my research for the show. Tell me, that's really the beginning of the story about CureWise, right? So tell me, your what happened to your home in the Palisades fire, and tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, like many thousands of others, our house burned down in that fire in January 2025. Maybe a little less usual story. It also led to me getting diagnosed with a rare cancer. I've learned many people with cancer sort of end up being misdiagnosed for a while, and then they might eventually get diagnosed. I had been misdiagnosed probably for about a year, but the fire displaced us from our home in Malibu to near Palm Springs, and I'd say a fresh set of eyes and on all the data and all the anomalies in my data, plus the fact that it was sort of at a tipping point and getting worse, led to getting diagnosed with, I say, a rare variant of multiple myeloma. I actually got diagnosed in the emergency room. If you're getting diagnosed with cancer in the emergency room, that's pretty much a sign that it probably got missed along the way. But yeah, a lot of things hit me all at once. Losing our home, and then all of a sudden hearing you have cancer. But that led to a whole new chapter, because as I started to really, I'd say, become obsessed with precision medicine and the advances in genomics and genomically targeted therapy in cancer, realizing that there's a whole new frontier in medicine and possibility in cancer, and also realizing that most people are still not really accessing what's possible for them, because the guidelines probably are 10 years behind what's possible today. So that led to a whole new chapter, a whole new journey into what I'm doing now.
Good. We'll dive in a moment, but I thought let's double click a little bit into that patient experience that you had, because that was kind of the impetus for you starting CureWise. So what was it, or what surprised you the most about your own experience? Things that maybe you didn't fully appreciate until you lived it yourself.
Well, I'd been involved in healthcare and digital health and complex care management. Had one of the leading companies in that field, and helped even lead to the reimbursement codes for how that's telehealth and remote monitoring and all the stuff is paid for today, all kind of originated in our work. So I'd been in healthcare for a big chunk of my career, but it was always for somebody else's problem. It's a little different perspective when it's like for your own problem. And one thing I always knew when I was doing complex care management for chronic diseases, nobody really wanted disease management. Everybody really wanted a cure or a better treatment. And that's especially true in cancer. We're doing a lot of things to help people navigate cancer. But if you have to choose between the world's best navigation tool and a cure, you're going to pick a cure every day. So our real kind of mission from the very beginning, personally and professionally in our company, is we want to accelerate cures for cancer. What it turns out, though, that for a lot of people, there are things out there already that are getting closer and closer to a cure, and they just don't know about it yet. You might know about it if you go to the Mayo Clinic and you go to the top specialist, but if you go to just your community doctor, you're more likely going to get put on the guidelines, which is probably for a lot of people, that's absolutely the right thing to do. but there might be a lot more out there. If you knew about it and you knew how to advocate for it, it might make a big difference. And for me, I no doubt that that saved my life because I had a rare variant. I had a rare disease, and then I had a very specific mutation in the cancer that kind of said, hey, you know what? The standard of care and the guidelines is probably not going to work that great. And it started to plateau by month two. It was like, okay, I don't think this is going to work. But there was something else that was highly targeted based on the very specific mutation that was extraordinarily effective. If I didn't know about it, I wouldn't have gotten it. Once I knew about it, I was on the hunt to figure out how to get it, talk to doctors, talk to specialists. The challenge is that a lot of this new stuff is, I'd say, not just beyond the guidelines, but there's a real challenge in a lot of this precision medicine, all this new stuff. We haven't had the clinical trials on it the way we do a lot of the approved therapies. And the reason we don't have the clinical trials is because if you look closely enough at cancer, every cancer ends up being a rare disease. If you do the genome sequencing and you get all the details, you have a lot of smaller and smaller cohorts, and it's harder and harder to do trials. So the treatment that worked for me didn't have a full-blown clinical trial yet. They were trying to do one, they couldn't get enough patients for it. But there was a lot of case studies and anecdotal evidence and case studies, which you do enough case studies, it starts to look very compelling. But in the practice of medicine, it's still kind of considered anecdotal. But there was never going to be a clinical trial. There's not enough people with the specific thing that I had. But I dug into the science. It's like this is what I want. This is what I need. This has been extremely effective where it's been used on my specific mutation. So I wanted that. And it turns out, my story is not unique. There's I saw National Cancer Institute had a report last year in the Journal of the NCI where they surveyed all of this, and they said about 60% of people with cancer have some actionable mutation. Only 15% of people with cancer are getting treated with something that's targeting that. So there's a big gap between what's possible and what most people are getting.
I'm assuming that you're referring to that innovative new personalized medicine, like the CAR T cell therapies. Is that what you were advocating for your particular variant of melanoma or myeloma?
No, that's even more advanced, and that's even more, that's yet another wave of things that are extremely
Okay.
promising. So no, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking
Okay.
about something that's
Something
some
else.
way
Okay.
more basic than that. But if you look at, like what is cancer in the first place? Cancer was not something I'd really even thought about until I'm like studying it religiously a year ago. But what happens with cancer? It's like your own cells, your own genes mutating in a way where it's evading your immune system, growing fast, evading your immune system, and somehow has disabled this mechanism called programmed cell death, which says, hey, you know what? If I'm defective, I should shut down. So it's kind of a miracle that we've got trillions of cells and they all have the same DNA, from your toenail to your eyelid, it's all the same DNA. How does that all stay in sync? Well, the fact is, we've got mechanisms that keep us in sync. Well, once in a while, out of the trillions of cell divisions, once in a while, there's a mutation that kind of escapes all of these systems we have to keep this in check. And then it kind of grows out of control on its own, kind of, not for the whole body, it's doing its own thing. So traditional chemotherapy was just kill anything that's growing fast, because this is growing fast, kill anything that's growing fast. And then immunotherapy is, well, it's evading the immune system. So is there a way we can trigger the immune system to find it? And CAR T is in that category of like, let's use the body's own immune system or, to hunt these rogue cells down and kill them. And then the other, kind of other frontier as well, it hacked its way, cancer is a hacker, and it hacked its way out of programmed cell death, the natural shutdown mechanism for defective cells. So I looked at that and I said, okay, well, I was on an immunotherapy that basically tagged every cell in the whole category and killed them. And I was on traditional chemotherapy, kill anything that's growing in the original stuff that I was on. And I could see that I had a variant that was not responding very well to that. There was another drug that was approved for a different disease, so it was available, but off-label, that people had found through some first retrospective analysis of other studies, and then with kind of a lot of case studies trying it, found that with the specific mutation I have, this was the key to unhacking the hack on programmed cell death. So I basically got rid of traditional chemotherapy, kept the immunotherapy, and got this other drug, which was approved for some form of leukemia, not approved for multiple myeloma or the version of multiple myeloma that I have, and hadn't really had it hadn't, I'm on a combination that hadn't had a clinical trial. The first ever phase 2 study, if you looked in clinicaltrials.gov, was recruiting at UCSF for, and the principal investigator got, two massive drug companies, with two different drugs to agree to do this trial on this combination therapy. And I'm like, I want that. That seems like what I need. I reached out and they had shut down the trial. They canceled the trial. So I'm like, well, why did you do that? Like, what did you find out something bad about this? And it's like, no, we just couldn't get enough patients. But the doctor said, I still think it's, and all my patients went on this anyways. I think it's the right thing to do. I went to UCSF, I went to UCSD, I went to Mayo Clinic to top people in the field, and they all kind of confirmed that, yeah, if I were you, I would do this. And how did I find out about it? Well, I found out about it by using AI to analyze my biopsies. I mean, I didn't know anything about this. It's super rare. I mean, hardly anyone knows about this stuff unless you're a super specialist. But I'm like looking at my biopsies, looking at my results, and looking and feeling like, this is not working fast enough. I'm going to have a lot of organ damage if I stay on this treatment. After 2 months, like getting tested like every week and seeing it started to work a little bit, and then month 2 was just flat. It was like it's still in the real danger zone. So I was very, very eager to explore what else might be out there.
Got it. And you mentioned that, I mean, your background's very interesting. You've had a career in health technology, as you indicated up front, and you understand use of AI. You're obviously taking great agency and advocacy in your healthcare to find what's best for your particular diagnosis. But at what point, Steve, did all of this come together for you and say, now I'm going to build something for the patient? Like this experience really moved you, right?
Well, the first 6 months, I was just building something for myself. I mean, I was working on a bunch of AI projects, mostly in education. And I was doing, I'd say, interesting things with AI, things that may feel more commonplace now, but 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, they were pretty frontier and cutting edge. But I was doing multiple agents, using multiple models, and having the agents debate each other from different points of view about things, and using that as a way to explore new ideas in science and new ideas in all kinds of different fields, and also just doing it for fun as a way to learn. And I could have Einstein debate Feynman, and I'd have Einstein on GPT and Feynman on Anthropic, and have them debate each other about some new question in science. So I was doing a bunch of things like that when I was in the hospital. And I had just gotten this diagnosis, and there were a lot of signs, there were a lot of abnormal things in my medical record. I was being tested for everything. I'd full body scan, endoscopy, colonoscopy, hundreds of blood tests. And there were a lot of things there were a lot of red flags, but it was being diagnosed at the time as like, it's just gas, it's just stress, it's nothing serious. But I'm looking at all these red flags. I'm in the hospital. My first question was, well, why didn't they catch this sooner? And I basically fed all my old data from all the old tests into my AI agents and kind of had them debate my, kind of like a tumor board. I had my agents debating my case, and they didn't agree on the diagnosis, but they all agreed that it could be this, it could be that. It's probably a problem in my bone marrow, and I need to have this other testing to settle their debate. For me, it's like that never even came up. No one even mentioned bone marrow or any of this stuff, in my previous doctors. And I had really good doctors, and I had things that affected the parts of my system that my doctors were looking at, that it just was rare enough that it wasn't on the radar. But the AI immediately picked it up. So for me, that was the first clue that there's a lot of medical knowledge already. This was over a year and a half ago. There's already a lot of medical knowledge in the training set for AI. This could be very helpful in educating me about, my specific situation, which, everybody's specific situation ends up being unique and probably rare. So, I was a great tool for educating myself about it. So the first thing was just kind of the realization that wow, AI would have diagnosed this a lot sooner, or doctors using AI, to cross-check them would have diagnosed it much sooner. And I think that's happening in medicine now. I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on where AI is kind of, a decision support tool in medicine. So I think a lot of that stuff's already happening now. But the next question is, okay, well, now what do I do about it? What are the, what do people do about this? I'm put on 4-part cocktail of therapy, and I look into each one, and some of these things, it's like, wow, this drug is these 2 parts of the cocktail, these 3 parts of the cocktail are actually used in about 100 different cancers, and they're really, really old. And I'm like, I have something really specific. How could it be that this, 50-year-old drug used in 100 different cancers is really the right thing for me? So there's, and I'm not presuming that it wasn't, I'm just sort of asking the question. But, it turns out, that was a fairly generic cocktail plus one new thing, which is this immunotherapy, which is really powerful. And, the real treatment is like the immunotherapy, but let's kind of close off some of the escape hatches with all these old drugs. I was looking for something more precise and more targeted to what I have, because the other drugs were starting to already cause neuropathy and, have they have a lot of side effects and a lot of things. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So I'm digging in and asking the question, is there a better way? So I'm already asking that question. But, where do you go when you have a question like that? You can go try to search PubMed or something, and, you're going to have a whole bunch of things pop up. You don't really have an idea whether or not they're relevant to you, or, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a microbiologist. I'm trying to figure out like what's most relevant to me and explore that and learn about that. When AI has been trained on all the medical literature, it's a great path to get closer to finding what is most relevant to you, so that you can ask your doctor about it, so that you can go and say, like, what about this? What about that? And so most of the things I'm on now are the result of me saying, well, what about this? Shouldn't I take that? And, if I'm doing this stuff on offense and now it's working, but it's immune compromising, what can I do about that? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that getting because I asked about it.
I think, Steve, what I'm seeing too. I spent a career in oncology and at various parts of pharma, and you're really sort of an avatar now for like a rising consumerism of
Mhm.
patients who are doing a lot of what you're doing. So let's dive into CureWise, where you've kind of set the table around how you're already kind of asking the questions and building a lot of these tools for your own use. Tell us about CureWise, and for someone who's just been handed a cancer diagnosis, let's say, and is completely overwhelmed, walk us through what happens when they use your platform. What does that experience look like, and what can it do for them?
Yeah, well, the first thing is connecting your medical records and getting all of that organized. And you find that in cancer, especially if you've gone and gotten some second opinions, and you've, like in my case, I have 8 different health systems. My medical record, it's all in my chart, but there's 8 different versions of it, and they're actually different databases in different places, and sometimes with different units of measure and different, like normal ranges. And so, anyways, the first thing was pull all of that together in one place. Kind of get rid of a lot of the redundant notes and copy paste that's cluttered the whole medical record, but get down to kind of the core. That's what we call the canonical medical record. Your deduplicated, unique, consolidated medical record, and get that prepared in a way that the AI can be using that. So imagine that the first step is, I think most people with a health issue are already going to ChatGPT and asking questions. I mean, this is already ubiquitous that people are asking AI medical questions. But when you do this with CureWise, um, you're doing this with the top 3 models, the latest top 3 models, and you're doing it with your entire medical record in context, and a lot of kind of guardrails around keeping it focused on oncology. That's kind of evidence based, and like helping you prepare to talk to your doctor about it. In the end, your doctor diagnoses and treats and prescribes, but if doctors have been trained that you really want you want collaborative care, you want shared decision making, you want an informed patient who knows what's going on. There are a lot of decisions that the patient has to make, especially in cancer. There's a lot of things like, you can do this, you can do that, you decide. How do you make that decision when you just, without being informed? So you need to educate yourself if you have kind of AI is there with your medical record to help educate you, you can be a better participant in that conversation and kind of ask all of your naive questions initially of the AI, kind of go back and forth. I mean, I even now, even though I've sort of become an expert in my own disease, I still go rehearse with the AI before I go to my doctor's visit because, I get 10 minutes with my doctor max. How do I make every one of those minutes count? And not, kind of below that limited amount of time on kind of the wrong things. I prepare, I rehearse, I ask the questions I'm going to ask with AI in advance and kind of get educated and kind of get more confident and comfortable so that I can be at the table as a better participant. And it just, it makes care better all the way around if you are, kind of a full participant in the process because my doctor has hundreds of patients with hundreds of different types of cancer. I just have me. So, I have, if you're not advocating for yourself or if someone's not advocating for you, it's very easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle.
Well, describe for me a little bit more about your platform as it's a multi-agent AI system, right? So
Yeah.
just like you explained for your own personal use, we're different AI specialists were reviewing your case and so forth. Like, can you explain that in simple language for a patient to understand? Like, what is your platform actually doing? What does it help the patients better understand?
So let's say you have a question about try to again, explain my diagnosis. Like, tell me what are what's the range of things that are out there in science related to my specific diagnosis. Not just my specific diagnosis, but I have this whole pathology report, of the genome sequencing of my cancer, and I don't know what any of this means. And there's a whole bunch of stuff, and in the details there. What does it all mean? So it might be just trying to understand what's there, trying to understand what are the range of options that people have done or can do. Or, you mentioned CAR T. Like, tell me about CAR T. Is that relevant to me? Like, well, I don't understand it. I saw it in the news. All my friends saw an article and they're all texting me with this article telling me that, that cancer's cured now. Like what does this mean anything for me? Like, am I even a candidate for this? I mean, in my case, it's in my bone marrow. One of the big treatment options is bone marrow transplant, which is a pretty, pretty high stakes, big deal. They basically harvest your stem cells, kill off and all of your bone marrow in your entire body, be in the hospital for a couple of weeks, and then implant this in and then regrow it. But I had other kinds of damage in my bone marrow from the disease, and it was like it wasn't clear whether or not I was a candidate for it in the first place. But would I even need that if I got into this other targeted treatment? So there's like, if I had gone into my doctor and said, I want a bone marrow transplant, if I'd been doing that, I probably would have gotten a bone marrow transplant. But, I wanted to understand what all these options are. And also what happens if I'm on something. I looked like I was having resistance. Like, well, then what? The thing about cancer is not only is every case on the planet biologically unique, it also evolves and adapts. So anything you do to treat it, that cancer's good chance is going to start evolving, in response to that. It's kind of a Darwinian process that's going on inside you. So if you do any kind of point solution for cancer, you just do one thing, chances are it's going to evolve around it and it's going to come back. That's why there's always a cocktail. It's like, let's do multiple things and try to, have a better chance of taking it down. But everybody has a unique set of things going on. Someday in the future, when we've started to cure a lot more cancer, it's probably going to be because we truly personalized the treatment cocktail to the very specific nature, the specific biology of that patient's cancer. We're not there yet, but I was looking very much kind of based on the science of what was going on, asking questions as I learned about it, like why, it's kind of like keep asking why, like a little kid, like why? Okay, oh, yeah, but why is that? Well, why is that? You just keep asking why, and you start to get educated. You start to realize that, that there is a lot going on out there. It's not necessarily relevant to you, but there might be something that is relevant to you that you should dig deeper on and you should talk to your doctor about.
Steve, so I understand that the CureWise platform is a decision support tool, not a diagnostic tool.
Right.
That being said, for patients, so you mentioned that they need to upload their MyChart information or relevant information and get all that together. And so for patients with rare cancers or rare diseases and genomically driven tumors, how does your platform help them learn about personalized treatment options? Like where in the user flow? So they upload this information, right? And then your multimodal IAI, because sort of does something behind the scenes, maybe suggests different sort of personalized options for them. I mean, walk us through like what do they actually see? Because you're skilled at prompting. You've been prompting, and like I don't know that the average
Right.
person and with their healthcare literacy and so forth is able to sort of know even what to prompt.
We help you with that first, though. When
Oh,
you
oh,
when you connect your medical record, you bring all your medical record together. It's electronic. I mean, we're basically using the APIs of the medical records, and with your consent, you can pull together your medical record, put it all in one place, and the first thing you go is to chat, and there's some prompts there. If you don't know where to start, it's like press the button that says, explain my diagnosis, or explain the treatment options, or explain this, explain that. And then, or you have your own question. My doctor said this, or I heard this, or my friend texted me that. Asking whatever your questions are, and then it's responding to that, but it's also suggesting, like, here are the next 5 questions you might be thinking of asking, or if you didn't know what to ask, here's some ideas. So it is helping you prompt it. The other part is the multi-agent, multi-model part. So we're just doing it with 3 leading models right now from Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google. But they've all been trained on medicine. They have potentially different, they're potentially different. Like when you have them cross-check each other, it's really helpful. It's really helpful to give you confidence that I'm digging as deep as I can get. So, as far as the kind of the underlying knowledge, so there is a lot of literature about the different variants in cancer. There's this database called CIVIC, the Clinical Interpretation of Variants in Cancer database. This is kind of like, I think, like 5,000 papers that are focusing in on the next generation sequencing, the variants, and what does it mean, and is it treatable? Like in my case, I had a very specific mutation. People have found that a certain drug was really effective with that mutation. That's in this database, but only like 5% of the papers in the CIVIC database are tied to FDA approved standard of care, kind of the default option. 95% of the data in there is case studies, off-label use, things that are still in clinical trials. And so what you realize is that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge out there about cancer that's not yet into the kind of mainstream medicine. It's there if you go to Mayo Clinic or Dana-Farber or a leading cancer center and talk to the top person. Like if you're getting elite care, you're going to get this stuff. I mean, these are the people who wrote those papers, so you're going to get it. So a lot of what I'm doing is like, how can we democratize this? And it's really about the knowledge, and that you can be a doctor at an oncologist at a community oncologist, and not at one of those elite centers. But if you're a patient, you're not going in with anything. You're just saying, like, do whatever you're going to do. It's very high chance you're going to get whatever the guidelines say. But if you go in, even in that case, and you go in informed and say, hey, look, I found these, this is really, really targeted to me. Not like I did a Google search and here's a pile of stuff, I think I'm an expert, but it's like, I see in my biopsy, there's a specific genetic variant of my cancer. Like, can we talk about that? Because I see there's a bunch of papers from Mayo Clinic where people who had that variant are getting this other treatment. I mean, can we talk about that? And I think that you'll find that most doctors are scientists at heart, and they care about patients. They just don't have time to go do the research on every patient. So if you're proactive and you educate yourself, and you also kind of be humble and learn about just how to engage. Like, I'm sure that there are patients from hell who come in and think they know all the answers. And it's like, no, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to enable you to have a thoughtful conversation with your doctor and be more informed about what's going on, because your doctor might be overloaded with with patients. There's a shortage of oncologists. You might not even be talking to your doctor. You might be talking to the nurse practitioner. You've got to get educated if you're going to get to the frontier. So the purpose of CureWise, we know there's a gap between what's possible and what most people get. This gap is documented in the literature already from the NCI that they quantify what is this gap. How many actionable patients with actionable mutations are out there? How many actually get treated for it? There's a pretty big gap. We're trying to help close that gap, and it's education that's going to help close that gap.
So, Steve, what does success look like for CureWise a couple years down the road?
So a couple years down the road, there's sort of two parts of our mission. One is overall, how do we accelerate cures? But the first part of it is how do we help patients get closer to what science already makes possible? And that's kind of this educational process about what's going on with your own biology. The second part of it is how do we help science learn from every patient's experience? So, it might be that your doctor is doing the best thing that's known right now for your cancer, and getting educated on that and just knowing that your doctor is doing the best thing possible also is very, very comforting, because it's the anxiety of wondering, like, am I getting the best thing? If you find out that your doctor is doing the same thing that the top person at Mayo Clinic would be doing, that also is a really good thing to know about. And the fact is 600,000 people in the US are going to die of cancer this year, and cancer is going to return for a lot of people who, they're in remission and it returned. So, it's going to come back, and it's going to stay complicated. It's going to be difficult for a long time. But as we get more and more kind of data from understanding why did some people recur, why did some people not, why did some people respond, other people didn't, that's the kind of data that's going to help accelerate the science. So part of it is help you, with your disease, understand what's going on and get the best care possible. The other part of it is all of us together. Let's help accelerate the science. So 2 years from now, we're doing both halves of that. Right now, we're just helping people navigate, but by 2 years from now, we're going to be accelerating science.
Wonderful. I think that just to wrap things up for the show today, Steve, if there's a caregiver, a spouse, or a parent listening to the show today, listening to you right now, trying to advocate for their loved one, someone battling a cancer diagnosis, what's the single most important thing that they should be doing right now?
Most important thing is get educated in your biology and your disease so you know what's going on. And that sounds daunting, but there are tools like CureWise that can help educate you in a very focused, targeted way. And if you spend a couple hours just talking to CureWise about your medical record, you're going to learn a huge amount, and that's going to help you move forward. But specifically, the one thing that I always tell people, who I know that we diagnosed with cancer, the first question I said is, well, did you get it sequenced? This is a mutation of your own cells. If you don't know what's going on or what mutated and what happened, go get this. You get the most advanced sequencing you can to understand what actually is going on. Because if you're just if you look at the database, I have this database that we have access to that we've been studying, which is 225,000 cancer cases from leading centers across the US, anonymized, blinded data with the sequencing. And you see that there are over 800 types of cancer when you go by like organs, where did it start? There's like 800 different cohorts, types of cancer in there. When you go to the genes, there are 1,600 different genes that have mutated. When you look at the variants there, each gene has hundreds of different variants. So you realize that there is a lot of variation in what could be going on with your cancer. So you got to figure out what the details are and see whether or not there's been research that relates not just to your cancer is in this organ, but no, the mutation in the cells is this, and there are people studying that mutation or this collection of mutations. Like that's the first place to go, is to go deeper, look, understand what your cancer actually means, understand what your unique biology is. Make sure you're asking for the most advanced sequencing, because those are the keys to all of the new precision medicine are based on what comes out of those tests. So you got to start there, and then you got to educate yourself.
And just for the listeners out there, I think there's a lot of different diagnostic companies that do
Mhm.
the various forms of genomics, but I think one of the more popular ones, right, that everyone, if they want to look something up, it's Foundation Health, right? They do a full genomic panel with
Yeah.
for all the actionable mutations across all cancer types, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of leading companies that do that, and Keras and Tempus, and they're different ones that do it. But like, and it might be that your insurance pays for this one, but not that one. But you
Right.
but look up next generation sequencing, figure out what like ask for it, just ask for it.
Terrific.
And sometimes doctors say, well, I can't do it because no matter what it says, it's not gonna change what we're gonna do. But that's why it's helpful to understand, like, well, here's how it might change what we would do, because there are different options out there. And also risk clinical trials that you might be eligible for, that are some of the most promising new things are still in clinical trials. And that's something often this stuff is like, well, we'll try the standard of care and we'll only try the good stuff if standard of care fails. And that's a very frustrating place to be, because if you can predict that standard of care is not going to work because it only works 20% of the time and you're not in the 20% group, and we know that because of your genomics, then why waste a year on something that we already can predict is not going to work, especially if there's an alternative. But a lot of kind of the standard way of doing this is, no, first we do the thing that's in the standard of care, and then if it fails, then we can try this other stuff. In my case, failing at standard of care could have meant, my doctor told me this, could mean that you need a heart transplant or a kidney transplant. It's like, like, I don't want to wait and see if this fails. I could already tell by month 2 it was going to fail. So, like, I'm not going to do that for a year and have all this organ damage. I want to get the good stuff first. So there might be a case where the standard of care, it's like, hey, let's get a 20% chance of success. But for your genes, there's something else out there that has a 60% chance of success. Why don't you do the good stuff first? So, and I think that's what the leading cancer centers do, because they understand all of this. But if most people don't have the opportunity to go to the Mayo Clinic, and if you're in a community health system where there aren't enough oncologists and everybody is rushed, they're going to say, well, here's what the guidelines say, that's what we do. And I was
Yeah.
in that case too. I mean, my doctor is like, we don't do anything that's beyond the guidelines. We did the guidelines first, only if it fails. And I was like, well, that's not good enough. So I proactively sought out specialists at leading centers to convince everybody that this is what we should do.
A lot of great information on this show today, Steve. Thank you for sharing your personal story and all of the great knowledge and experience. I think for those listening out there, be sure to bookmark this episode, and I'll leave contact information for CureWise in the podcast description below. I can tell your personal story is very moving. You've been through a lot, and I could see the mission that you're on, Steve. And I just wish you the best of luck and helping educate patients in the future. So thank you for joining the show today.
Well, thank you. When you get sort of a really strong signal from the universe, your house burns down, and then you get diagnosed with cancer, and then you figure out something that helps you get to a remission, it kind of is a pretty strong sign that, yeah, I think this is the right thing for me to focus on. I think that a lot of people could benefit from this. So,
well, with so much going on in your life, you've shown such resiliency, and I would argue you're in the right place at the right time to do this, given your health tech background too and knowledge of AI, Steve. So keep building and let the mission continue.
all right,
Really a
well,
pleasure meeting you.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the RX for Biotech podcast to hear directly from the leaders who are shaping the future of personalized medicines. And if you or someone you know is navigating a care journey, be sure to visit therapyforme.ai to search for a specialist near you. And if you need that extra support, be sure to schedule a virtual telehealth appointment with one of our nurse navigators who can help answer your questions. Thank you for listening.